Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this EBAA webinar on reduced required landing distance operation, a tongue breaker indeed, and also a presentation on a tool that has been developed by a joint initiative by EBAA and EASA to support the implementation of a new piece of regulation. My name is Johan Glass. I'm with the EBAA Secretariat, and before we start, just a few housekeeping items I'd like to mention. As you've noticed, when you connected, your microphone and camera has been automatically switched off. And in order to get questions from you that I strongly encourage you to do, there is a Q&A tool available. Please use it, and you will find it alongside the chat function. The aim, of course, in the final Q&A session will be to answer, if not all, most of your questions directly. And if not, and if you have questions afterwards, just send an email either to the email you find here, safety@ebaa.org, or to any of your normal contacts at the EBAA Secretariat. Finally, the meeting will be recorded, both audio and video. The exact details on how this will be made available, I will have to get back to you, but I suggest you keep an eye out on the EBAA website. A quick look at what we have ahead of us for the next 1.5 hours or so. We'll start at a rather high level and then drill down into more and more detail into the regulation, get some background and then a few words from EASA on the cooperation and joint initiative that led up to developing this tool and make it available to operators and regulators. We have a look at the regulation itself and a presentation of the tool that has been developed. And finally, some words on the experience of using the tool in the application and approval process from Denmark, where we did a proof of concept test case this summer before we decided to launch it and have this webinar and show it to all of you. And finally, to repeat myself, the Q&A session. With this, I'd like to hand over for some opening words and background to the EBAA Chief Operations Officer, Robert Baltus, and you have controls, Robert.
Good morning, and thank you all. And let's make this an interactive session to start with. On the right, if you click on the chat function, who's the first person who can type in the right name of this airport? And let's see if we find somebody who's quick enough to type it in. And it has all to do with the session today. So while everybody is slowly getting in, I see some names flying in there from Tina and Tassilo. Okay, it's La Mole. If we have that one, we move to the next one. Which airport are we looking at here? If you just put in the full name, not. So what airport are we looking at here? Tassilo is quick. There we go. Lugano. Excellent. Thank you very much. And we're going for the winner with the next one. And if you don't know it, look to the top right-hand corner. You look at which airport? JFK, there we go. Good morning. Well, that's Le Mans. And what do all these airports have in common? They need, or they have issues with payload with larger aircraft getting in, etc. So the EBAA has been looking at how can we safely ensure that people flying on commercial operation into these airports, because in 2013 the EBAA did commissioned the report on illegal charter, and there were two operational findings we had. The one was that people tended to fly into airports privately, because with the additional length required to fly in commercially, you either wouldn't have the payload or you couldn't fly into a specific airport. The other item that came out was FTL, that was burdensome, etc., etc. Specifically for this call, we were looking at how can we now look at this and see how can we fly in safely in that airport, flying commercially. So following the 2013 report, we looked at what are the factors that make a flight into an airport safe or not. So what are the most likely variables that we need to look at to ensure that we can land somewhere safely? Now, with the help of the NLR, which is a research institute in aviation in the Netherlands, and Captain Rob van Ekeren, who was commissioned as a consultant and helped the EBAA with this, we looked at all the factors that can make the difference between landing safe or not. Now, if you're as aviation minded as I am, I would fully recommend when you have the chance, when he shows up at an event, have a drink with Rob, because he has a lot of anecdotes, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of things around aviation on landing safely that you really should know. But for this purpose, Rob, you will hear later on in the call, will go into the details of the RRLD. Anyway, after 2014, we found out there are a number of variables, and if we apply those correctly, we would be able to fly into smaller airports like the ones I showed before, with more payload, equal safety or better. And I personally think it's probably even better. And we went back to EASA. So EASA has been very receptive. And for people who don't know EASA well enough, EASA thrives on input from industry and all the other stakeholders, because we are their eyes and ears. We need to make sure that they appreciate what's important, but also help them and explain to them why things are important and what we need. And they are very receptive. And in 2016, EASA started on RMT 0296, which ended up with an opinion in 2019, all regarding the reduced landing distance for the airports. Now, after 10 years work with Rob, EASA, EBAA, NLR, the RRLD came into force as of August the 12th, 2021. So we have, together with EASA, been able to create a great tool for you to fly into smaller airports, but it's a difficult one, and we appreciate it. So we're not finished with it as yet. We both, and this is EASA and the EBAA, appreciate that there's two parties for which all these new regulations are an opportunity, but it's also difficult. And as operators, we always like to moan about the authorities and say, oh, they don't understand it, etc., etc. Equally, it is sometimes really difficult to understand for us as operators. So we looked at a concept: how can we make this useful tool that really will help our industry, because it's specific for business aviation, cat operations. How can we make this tool available to the NAAs and to our operators? Now, that's what this session is about, to inform you, to help you, to guide you, to give you the tools to implement this regulation. At the same time, through the work that Rob and EASA have done on the checklist, we're trying to do the same thing for the NAAs. So at the end of the day, if you go through all the hoops and your NAA goes through the same hoops, we've reached a harmonization or standardization whereby there will be hopefully an easier transition I'm not going to say an easy one, an easier transition to apply these rules. And we think this will really help you and set things apart. Now, we've already tested it with a Danish operator, Blackbird, and the Danish CAA. So the proof of concept has been done. We've looked at it. You will hear about that later as well. And this is the first time that the regulator and the industry together try to roll something out. And if this works, this is way bigger than you think, because if we can do this with more regulation coming up, we make your life easier, we make the life NAA easier, and that's something which is, the most important pillar for the EBAA after safety, is making sure that regulation helps you and is as low, the threshold is as low as possible. So we are very excited. We're very excited about RRLD. We're very excited about the cooperation with EASA on this. And today should be a blanket to explain you what's happening. We're still working on the tools and making them more and more accessible for you. So watch this space. And we hope to roll it out as we go ahead. And then it's over to you. And then going back to those 3 airports, there's plenty of more airports where you would like to go or where you had restrictions, etc., etc. Let's hope all the work for this past decade, it's almost like watching paint dry sometimes, but that's the way a regulatory process works. Let's hope this will really help you. With that, I'm almost finished, but I would like to make sure there have been some people also asking us about LDTA in the last few days. That's a different topic, landing distance at time of arrival. That has actually been addressed, and just a short pitch before we go over to John Franklin. We have an excellent flight operations working group. You should have received invites for it. It's run by Frans de Sjane from Flying Group and Simon Schintz from NetJets. LDTA and all these topics have been discussed. You ought to be there. As an operator, that should be your monthly or bi-monthly catch-up. The next one is on the 19th of November. So you'll see email addresses at the end, or you have a contact with EBAA. Make sure you go there. So with further ado, I see John is already there. I know Johan was supposed to give the introduction, but since you're there, John, we're very pleased to have you. John is the head of safety promotion at EASA, and he's going to explain us some very interesting insights from EASA before we go more to the regulation. There you go. Good morning, John.
Morning, Robert. Fantastic, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks for to you and all the team, Johan particularly, and everybody for organising this, and particularly also huge thanks to Rob for all his involvement in the task that we've been doing together, and also to my colleague Giovanni for providing the technical input to the presentation later. Hopefully it's a really good session, and just as a kind of initial more an introduction really into what we're doing in terms of our safety promotion and the task, I thought I'd kind of do something a little bit different and start by talking a little bit about tractors. And you probably wonder what's the relevance of that, but what we're trying to do is kind of highlight the goal that we have with our safety promotion work, and particularly with Together for Safety, to do something a little bit new, to perhaps change the way we collectively as an industry talk about safe and effective operations. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So it all goes back to the 1840s, and there's a company called John Deere, or a gentleman called John Deere, whose company is now probably the largest agricultural company in the world. And in 1842, he revolutionized American farming with the invention of a steel plow. The original wooden and iron plows all the mud used to stick to them, and it was terrible. So he invented this steel plow, and the revolutionary approach of this plow meant that migration and farming spreading into the Great Plains of America was really possible. So if we can go to the next slide. Now, where this starts to become more relevant to aviation is actually then in the challenge of you imagine a situation where there's lots and lots of workers in an age where people don't necessarily, the mainstream people don't read, and they're trying to start using more and more complex machinery. And in 1895, John Deere, the company, started a magazine called The Furrow. For anybody who ever studies marketing, The Furrow is the original. It's like Instagram for the 19th century. It is the original content marketing. And what The Furrow was designed to do, it was a journal for the American farmer. And the goal was to use stories and conversation that people enjoy and that farmers enjoyed reading and discussing with the farm workforce, all the different ways they can have the knowledge to understand how you use, in this case, complex farm machinery in order to make the best of the farming operations that they were doing. And this is where it starts to really link into aviation. And the Furrow is a great example of how people use communication and kind of marketing principles in order to enable technology to be used to achieve a goal as safely and effectively as possible with a broad and diverse workforce. And if we can go to the next slide now. So ultimately, this is where for us, in terms of safety promotion, it's all about the conversations that we're starting, between all the different parties in the industry. And in the same way that the Furrow helped to normalize conversations about safe farming operations, that's one of the things we're trying to do in aviation. And one of the things, it's something actually we talked about. Any of you who were at the EASA FAA conference, I think 3 years ago, will have seen me talk about this before. But if we can go firstly to the next slide. So we added up the average life of a safety manager in terms of the number of pages and what that equated to in reality in terms of books. So if you take the various rules, the number of occurrence reports, accident reports, and the average number of things that an average safety manager has to do, it's like looking at the start of the year and having to read all of the Harry Potter books. Then the next slide, please, the Tolkien books, including Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So we're up to 5,589 pages. Then the Chronicles of Narnia go to 6,387. And then the next slide, it adds the Game of Thrones, 11,619 pages. And then the next slide, the Hunger Games takes us to 12,774 pages. Now, for an average safety manager in a small organization, that's 26 books and over 12,000 pages. If I walked into your office on the 2nd of January and put those actual books in front of you and said, there's the books, make sure you know what's in them and how they help you do whatever you need to do, we'll be back in 6 months, then you think you were a bit crazy. But that's kind of what we have to do. And then when we started our safety promotion activity, there was lots of thought, we can use video much more and all of these things. But as we highlight here, with those books that I talked about, if you watch the films of those books with billions probably of dollars thrown at them, that still equates to 5.3 days of films with over 20 films and 8 TV series of material just to understand what's in those books. And you probably still won't remember all of that even after that. So that's kind of the complexity challenge. And if we can go to the next slide, that we're trying to solve now. And this is where it's ultimately all about this conversation between regulators and organizations and their leaders and safety teams and support staff, and then the operational staff as teams and individuals. And that's really what this task about reduced runway landing distance has really been all about. It's been about how the regulating community create this new rule, this new thing, and then working with organizations, with collaborative organizations, particularly like the EBAA here in this case, to develop something to support the organization and the safety team in implementing something that has an operational benefit. And I think a webinar like this is a fantastic kind of step in this journey, is that it's that conversation between all of us about this challenge that we have to implement this, and it's kind of a blueprint for how we work together collaboratively between different organizations. So if we can go to the next slide now. So and that kind of sums up really quickly what Together for Safety is trying to achieve. And by working together in this collaborative way, we really start to make a difference. And ultimately our purpose in terms of our Together for Safety promotion work is to provide useful information that engages people in positive conversations about safety, so that the aviation community can then help themselves to be able to comply with the necessary rules and proactively manage risks to ensure safe, effective operations. And that's, for us, the real kind of drive for starting conversations, for listening, for sharing ideas, having different people discussing the challenges we face, and then these two sides of supporting compliance and supporting effective risk management, but never forgetting that at the end of this is the goal of a safe and effective operation with an operational objective. And obviously, I think this discussion and this collaboration becomes more and more important, particularly when we talk about smaller organizations, without a huge team of safety people to support them and other support staff. The more we can help you solve the challenges that you have and get on with your operational objectives, I think hopefully that's really what we're trying to do. And we have 4 key values for our safety, Together for Safety promotion. And the first one is to be collaborative. So we work together to understand the challenges you're going through and then be here to help support you, as a guide through it. I talk about it being a little bit, a bit like being, Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, and helping you be Luke Skywalker and providing that guide that gets you to where you need to be. And a key part of that is then the second part, which is about being useful and supportive. Us really understanding from you, and a key thing is then for you to be, particularly telling us, and feel free to particularly, I'm quite active on LinkedIn. If there's something you think we could help the industry by doing, please engage on drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's really appreciated. We kind of do what we think, and what people tell us we need to do. Obviously, the main goal is to support around what's on the European safety plan, but how we do that, particularly in terms of the different types of content we produce, is very much based on the feedback we get from what people want. And then the main thing is to be plain speaking, and I mean, sorry, can we go back just one? Is to be plain speaking, using clear language. It's not about necessarily just about making things simple, but it's about providing clear understanding of, here's we might provide a really complex document, but if we are clear what you as an industry should be doing with that document, is really focusing on that. We use this phrase, know, feel, do, is really being clear. What do you need to know? How do you want you to feel about this topic? And then really, what do you need to do? And then hopefully using new and interesting ways of engaging with you, so that things are easy to use, etc., etc. And then next slide, please. So from your side then, there are some key things we would appreciate you to do. The first one is use the material that's been creative and continue to give us feedback. The more we can improve it and develop it to meet whatever needs you have, that would be really great. And the feedback's really important. Particularly we're talking about this kind of particularly now during the kind of post-COVID ramp up, but generally, ideally all of the time, is how we engage in positive safety conversations. The more we talk with each other, regulators to organizations, within organizations, between organizations and their teams and safety staff, that's fantastic. And then the final bit is very much more and more a pitch for our well-being things, which is then being able to, focusing on looking after yourself, looking after others, and really, driving that, the positive aspects of working together so that we can have effective human performance. Hopefully that's a useful introduction and a nice little lead into the rest of the things that you've got going on. Thanks very much. Any questions before I finish my bit?
Thank you so much, John, for those words, and also thank you for the collaboration throughout this process. And as Robert mentioned, it has been a decade long, and the collaboration did not stop really with the regulation being published. It's continued to start the initiative of creating this tool that we will shortly hear more about. And when we go into the more technical details of the reduced required landing distance operations, first out, we will hear a bit more detail of the regulation itself from Giovanni Cima at EASA, who has been the lead, especially in the later part, developing the AMCs and guidance materials. And together with Rob van Eckeren, who Robert mentioned earlier, who's also been part of this process the whole way along, and the creator of the tool that hopefully will support industry, both operators and regulators, to give, and he will finish off this part with a short presentation of the tool itself. So with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Giovanni.
Yes, thank you very much. Hope you can hear me and see me well. First of all, I would like to thank again EBAA for organizing this webinar, as we particularly appreciate this kind of initiatives to engage with our stakeholders. My name is Giovanni Cima. I'm a senior expert for air operations at EASA, and I was in charge of the rulemaking task 296, which among other things included the introduction of the reduced required landing distance concept. My role today is to give you an overview of the work done in this task and the rules that we have in place today, providing some background both from the technical and regulatory perspective. And after that, I will hand over to Rob for entering into the details on how to apply to get the approval and everything, all the steps you need to take. So I think we can start now the presentation. Yes, next one, please. Here is a short overview of what I'm going to present you today. So starting with the background of the rules, and then we go into the regulatory steps, the set of requirements that we have for performance class A aeroplanes and performance class B, as there are a few differences between the two, and then some final considerations on how these rules are, how we see the implementation of these rules and the challenges associated to that. So next, please. You have probably seen this slide before in previous presentations, but it's still valid to illustrate the concept. What do we want to achieve? We want to land within 80% of the landing distance available against the traditional factors of 60% and 70% that we have been using for turbojets and turboprops until today. Why to do that? Well, first of all, to increase operational flexibility for operators, and also to harmonize with other regulatory systems, in particular the one of the FAA, and so to avoid market distortions in this particular segment of operations. How do we intend to do it? By defining the condition to attain a level of safety equivalent to that achieved when using traditional factors. So next, please. Here is a presentation of a short illustration of the input we got from this task to start the work, particularly as I mentioned before, the existence of similar rules in the FAA system, especially in FAR 135 and 91K, allowing the so-called eligible on-demand operations that you are probably familiar with. And then secondly, the study that was mentioned before in the introduction, conducted by NLR. This study took into account four, let's say, typical business operated aircraft categories and identified the main risks when operating with a reduced landing distance and proposed a number of mitigating measures. Starting from this, we took the work in rulemaking task 296 and developed the necessary conditions for performance class A and performance class B under an approval scheme with a number of additional mitigating measures that I will illustrate later on. So this is the history of the task. As you can see, it was a long way. The task started in 2015, we had an MPA in 16, and then finally got to an opinion in February 2019, which was turned into a regulation by the European Commission pretty soon. But unfortunately, along the way, we also had to pay a toll to COVID, because the rules were supposed to enter into force by November 2020, like the rest of the performance package in the same rulemaking task. But because of COVID, these and many other regulatory updates had to be postponed by an additional year. But now we have finally made it, as the rules are applicable since August this year, and we are now in the finally in the implementation phase. So next, please. Okay, here you see the scheme of the rule for performance class A aeroplanes, which is the rule in question is CATPOL A 255. And first of all, we have a set of conditions for eligibility in order to conduct this kind of operations. Particularly, these operations are possible for aircraft having a maximum seating configuration of 19, for non-schedule on-demand CAT operations, so they are not for normal commercial air transport operations, but only for the typical business aviation flights, and the aircraft has to be technically eligible for that by means of a statement in the flight manual, and I will elaborate on that in a moment. If you meet these eligibility conditions, then you can apply for to your national authority for an approval, and there is then a set of technical conditions to get this approval. This can be done in two ways: either through a risk assessment which demonstrates that the operations you conduct are equally safe to those with the traditional factors of 60% and 70%, which is quite challenging in my view, or you meet the conditions given by the rule. And these are depicted in the lower part of the slide. First of all, you cannot combine this kind of operation with special approaches such steep approaches or short landing operations or unstabilized approaches and so on. You cannot do it with tailwind, you cannot do it on contaminated runways, and in other hazardous weather conditions. When you land on a wet runway, you need to cross-check the results of your landing distance performance calculations with those provided by the LDTA rule. And you need to have in place a special program of analysis of the airports you intend to operate to. You need a special set of qualification, training, and monitoring requirements for the flight crew conducting these operations, and the flight crew must be recent in that, meaning that they have to do it regularly throughout the year. The equipment which is relevant for landing performance, such as brakes and other stopping devices, or all systems that affect somehow landing performance, has to be checked operative. And there is the final word is always of the piloting command, which is a general concept that applies to everything, but we felt the need to specify it once more in this context. Then I want to elaborate a bit on some of the conditions listed in the previous slide, starting with the technical eligibility for the aircraft. During the discussion in the rulemaking process with manufacturers and some national authorities, we have faced the fact that many different assumptions can be done during the certification of an aircraft in order to develop performance data. In particular, we have seen that in some cases, the operational factors of 60% and 70%, which are an ops rule, are somehow taken into account in the certification process, especially when the parametric method is applied to determine the landing distances. So in such a case, a reduction of the safety margin on the landing distance would not be compatible with the required reduced required landing distance concept. There are other cases where the factors have also been used by certain manufacturers to comply with the standard of CS25 1309. So only the manufacturer can have a clear picture of what has been done during the certification, and for this we have asked to put a statement in the flight manual that the aircraft is eligible to operate with a reduced operational factor. Regarding the non-schedule on demand, this is just to clarify the kind of operations that are allowed and the kind of operations that are excluded. So, for example, holiday charters, charter flights sold as a package of an holiday travel package are excluded. And the other point I want to mention is the wet check. When landing on wet runways, we have agreed during the rulemaking process to introduce a further safety measure, which consists in comparing the results of the calculation of with the 80% landing distance and the landing distance resulting from the LTDA concept. Which is anyway required by another rule, so you will have to face it in a way or another. So we thought that it's better to make this comparison at the beginning of the flight, just to avoid surprises at the time of landing and to have an additional protection for operations on wet runways. Next, please. Same scheme here for performance class B, but here the rule is slightly different because it's tailored for this smaller category of aircraft. Here, the eligibility is not linked to the flight manual statement. However, the approval will be given not for all runways, but only for specific aerodromes where a public interest has been determined by the state of aerodrome. So the approval will be aerodrome specific. A risk assessment is still required, but it is associated to the technical conditions. So we have an and here instead of an or. And among the conditions you see in the lower part, most of them are the same. And but there are a couple of differences, in particular as regards the control of the touchdown zone, which is specific to this kind of aircraft, and operations restricted only to VMC conditions only. Next, please. Like I said before, control, I elaborate on some specific points of the technical conditions. There is a requirement to have to exercise a control on the touchdown area, particularly by having markings or external references that indicate to the pilot the point beyond which a go-around would be necessary if touchdown is not achieved. And also they should develop, operators should develop instructions for go-around and bulk landing in their operations manual. There is also a requirement for additional maintenance for performance relevant equipment. And then the wet check is the same concept that I have explained before for performance class A airplanes. So now coming to the implementation phase, which is now ongoing, we see here a number of challenges that we will face directly as probably you know, EASA is conducting standardization inspections on national authorities. One challenge that we see on the side of the NAA is the different level of knowledge and experience that different national authorities may have on this particular topic, and which may lead to differences in the difficulties encountered in order to get the approval. From the side of the manufacturers, we know that several manufacturers have already worked to provide the technical eligibility, and having a link with the LDTA concept for wet runways, there could be also a challenge for the availability of necessary performance data. For operators, the challenges are the usual ones: management of changes, which always exist when starting a new type of operation, and then there is an effort and an investment required to do in the training and the qualification of the flight crew. So, like I said, this will be the focus on EASA standardization inspections on national authorities, at least for the first year. We will look on the side of authorities on inspector competencies, how the entire approval process is managed, and how they exercise oversight when the approval has been given to those to the operators. From the operators' side, we will check the management of change, how to ensure to have under control the aircraft eligibility and the airport eligibility, depending on the cases, the content of the OM, and the flight crew training. So this concludes the presentation. I'm happy to hand over to Rob for the next slot, and we will be happy to take your question in the final QA session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. And with that, we hand over to Rob van Eckeren for an introduction of the tool that has been developed. There you go. It's all up.
Yeah.
Your show.
Okay, thank you very much. The good news is I will only take 6 minutes of your time, guys, and then it should all be clear. Well, the main differences and the main advantages of the 80% operation is, of course, that you will have positively more payload, more destinations, and I also say more safety. It will increase, and a bottom line, more happy customers. That's all what it's all about. And the disadvantages are also there. You need some prior approval, as discussed by Giovanni and John. Compliance, full compliance, might be challenging, and you need some investments, and also could be time-consuming. Next slide. So, having all see that, if you look to the compliance process, as Giovanni said, you need to demonstrate an equivalent level of safety. And basically two... Je wekker is ingesteld voor 17 uur. Siri, hop off. And anyway, so there are basically two methods. Do your own risk assessment. It's not impossible. You could do it, but it will be very, very, very challenging. Or you could get the procedures already in place that we did with EASA. Anyway, you need to get your approval from the CA and NAA. Next slide. And what we really want to avoid is that an approval will be denied due to an incomplete or incorrect or unsatisfactory application, or by a let's say that you've submitted as an operator a fully correct application. However, your NAA is not up to speed yet for whatever reason, and therefore it will be denied. And we also would like to avoid that by hindsight you might discover that all the efforts required to get the 80% operation going are far more costly and far more time consuming than the advantages that it will bring you. Next slide. So basically, while the operators are puzzling what all the elements do we need to put in our application, basically the authority has the same issues. The inspectors will have the questions: are is what the operator put in, is that correct? Is it complete? Etc. So what we did is we developed a checklist, an interactive checklist. Do your own checklist. It's focused. It's to the point. It is only relevant for 80% operations. Nothing more, nothing less. So very short, to the point. And we really would like to try it to be user friendly. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, we developed 2 checklists, one for the operators, for the whole application process, one for the NEAs, for the authorities. They are different, and there's a brick wall in between. You know, don't want to mess the whole issues and make it not really what you really want. What we did though, we make sure that all the subjects are the same. So the application process and the authority approval process are 100% about the same subjects, and therefore we assume that miscommunication or incompleteness items will be avoided. Next slide. So it looks a bit complicated, but really it's quite simple. So if you done your application as an operator, and likely you will only do it once for your whole fleet at one time, or perhaps twice if you have another aircraft coming in, because it could be aircraft specific. But anyway, let's say as an operator will do it once. When you answered all the 29 questions of the checklist positively, you can directly submit the application to the NEA. That's possible. Next slide. If there are 1 or 2 or more questions which you cannot answer positively, or you have questions about it, we can provide help. EBAA can provide you help to look in these issues and say, okay, perhaps you might reword the application like this, or you should allocate this statement in your AFM or whatever. And next slide. Or you could, if everything is completed and everything is still are ready to send in your application, we could provide a quick scan checklist, just to have a quick scan through all your application before you send it in to your authority. That's all possible. Next slide. While the application process is really done for the operators, your crews, and like the operator will, as said, likely do it only once or twice in lifetime. Your crews will face every day they fly with an 80% flight, a number of items they have to follow. So we developed for the crews also a separate checklist, which contains all items required for a crew to make sure that everything is considered and is applicable for that 80% flight. Yeah. Next one. So in summary, you will get more destinations, more payload, more fuel, more safety, and more happy customers. You need to have prior authority approval, and that is complicated, might be complicated, and we want to help you to get this whole process going. And we developed a checklist for daily use for your crews to be used for every day. And more important, we are there to help you. We have all the knowledge which goes into the whole details of all the regulations, and we're there to help you. And that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rob. And let's see, I'll start my video. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your work throughout this decade of RRLD. As mentioned by Robert earlier, we ran a test case as a proof of concept to see that the checklist and the joint effort by EBAA and the EASA has paid off to something useful that would actually help the operator and regulator. And we were kindly offered the support of the Danish CAA and also one of our Danish members, Blackbird Air, who have used the checklist during the application process and approval process, which to me right now, I don't know if it's completed fully or not, but to have some views on the experience in using it. We have Jakob Panduro, the Director of Flight Operations and Head of Training at Blackbird, and also Per Holman Knudsen from the Danish CAA. Welcome. And let's start, since we're mostly operators in the room, from the application process. Jakob, to tell us a bit of your experience and how it has gone.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Johan, and good morning, everyone. Basically, it's fairly easy. I'm not going to tell you about the why we wanted to have this reduced required landing distance. There are many various reasons for that. But when I was asked if we could join in together with the Danish CA for running this case study, it was for me a really good way to figuring out if the thoughts we have had about it was actually true. So looking into the way we did the checklist, it was fairly easy to do it. It is you run through it and it's more or less like a yes and no, and it takes you to the next step. So definitely as an operator, we saved time, and we also saved energy thinking about how we could implement the procedure into our daily operation. In the case study, we ran it really watertight between the Danish CA and us. So I filled out everything I could regarding all the checklist items, and I also put on a few extra add-ons. And then I sent everything into the Danish CA, and then I'm guessing they ran it through their checklist. And it was fairly easy to do it as an operator, and we only had a few minor changes we need to do to the first application, and then we could have the approval. So that is in short words, that was the way we did it, and it was fairly easy to do it.
Thank you. And from after the application process, you handed everything into the Danish CAA, who used the counterpart. And like Rob said earlier in his presentation, that they are completely separate, not to interfere with the relationship between an operator and the regulator. And Per, how have you experienced using this checklists and the process itself?
Yes, hello, good morning, everybody. And sorry for joining this meeting a little late. There was an internal meeting that I had to attend to first. But anyway, our experience during this application process from Blackbird has been overall positive. And to answer the question, that was one of the fine questions before we got the scene, is that the application process has finished and Blackbird has got the approval for on one of the aircraft types anyway. Internal work in Danish CA is still going on, that we need to develop an internal procedure as well to cope with this new application form. So this case study has been a help to develop that procedure, and it's not completed yet, but we think that we will be able to complete that internal procedure within the next month or so in order to have it officially in our SMS system and so on. The work with the checklist provided during this application process has been fairly easy. However, there are still some issues in the wording with in the legislation that will probably be very difficult to avoid words like what is essential when we need to describe or look at the topography on an airport area, whatever, and which items are, let's say, important when evaluating bulk landing, for example. So there will, no matter how specific a checklist will be developed, there will always be some element of evaluation included in this approval process as well. But the checklist is a big help, that's for sure. And Jacob and I have had a lot of exchange, or a lot of, I don't know, but we have some exchanges on email and also phone talks about different items and what we as authority would need some further explanation or documentation and so on. But overall, the process has been fairly easy to control all the way using this checklist. But at the same time, we also need to include some of our internal approval processes in the authority as well. So the procedure that probably will be finished within the next months internally will of course include some of the elements or all the required elements in the regulations, combined with our own internal procedures of recording documents and so on. So that's still work in progress on that behalf, but it has been a learning curve for all of us processing this application, and we will probably face some applications from other operators within the next half year, and then we will have further experience judging these areas that I mentioned that are very hard to put down on paper, what's important and what's not important and so on. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure if we will be able to process an application from an operator electing to go this risk assessment way. That's very, very difficult for us as an authority, and it will also be difficult for the operator. So my guess is that we will not see that kind of applications, but still, as an authority, we need to be able to process that kind of application as well. And of course, no matter what kind of checklist you have, it's always up to the national authority to approve it or not to approve it in the end. But that's nothing new regarding this specific approval anyway, or not specific approval, but this reduced required landing distance approval. But overall, a positive experience, I must say. And although there's a lot of documents that we need to go through, and many of the things are described by the operator on forehand anyway. So when at the end of the day, the total number of changes that is required to be done in the operations manual for the operator is not that big. But of course, there's a lot of thinking and a lot of evaluation during the whole process. So it is extremely time consuming also from the NA point of view. So that might be an issue as well in the long run as let's take our own example in Denmark with those resources available. So it will be an application that is really time consuming for us to process. But again, overall, a positive experience with the checklist, and that will build the base for the way we will proceed with these applications in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you for those words. And yes, indeed, a checklist can never cover everything, and it's meant as a support to take you through the steps you need to do according to the regulation, and then of course it's not. And adjust it to your own needs, whether it be the operator or the regulator. And one of the things that this checklist tries to achieve is to walk you through the regulation and make sure that you do all these, fulfill all the requirements that are listed and that Giovanni went through with his slides. And hopefully this will save you time as well, not to submit an incomplete application or receive an incomplete application. So Jacob, what's your feeling? Would using the checklist, have it saved you time and made it easier to submit a complete?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'd saved time, and we also saved energy by not trying to create something that was already in the checklist. So that is one thing. Is that definitely it is reducing your time. You need to get the reduced required landing distance approval. That's one thing, and then the other thing is that it saves you using some extra energy on thinking about other things. And what I would say about it generally is not for the checklist, but generally just for the reduced required landing distance is one thing is to find the airports that you can actually apply for this. But please bear in mind, what is the width of the taxiways and the strength of apron, etc. And put that into your checklist as well internally in your companies. And what I feel about using, I won't say generic checklist for this, but the checklist developed here is that you can use your time thinking about all the other risks associated to reduce required landing distance as well, including the training and stuff like that. So definitely it saves time.
And if I pass on the same questions to you, Per, have it helped your process? And of course you need to adapt it to your own internal process at the agency.
Yeah, of course, it has been a great help to us as an authority, because when you need to process something new, you need to decide, well, where do we start and so on, and proceed from there. So in that view, it has been a great help of how to start this process anyway. But the steps along the road in the process is very different when you view on how much time you need to evaluate those elements. And as always, it will always be a balance between how many details is required for the different steps to say go, no go. And some steps are very easy, other steps are very dependent on an evaluation of some kind. So that's the most time consuming part of this process, as it is in a lot of other processes as well. So I don't think it's different in that way. But when it's something new, we need, of course, to adjust to what is a reasonable safety level in our evaluation of all this all these documents and so on. And the only way that we can gain experience with this is, of course, to process some more applications and then see how is the level of what's the quality of the material provided to us from the operators, and where do we stand in the different areas where it's not black or white, so to speak. So it has been a great help, but it's a time-consuming process overall, and it would be that I would say with or without the checklist, but totally time used will of course be a lot less when you have this checklist for a start. There's no doubt about that.
Excellent, thank you. I think Robert wanted to jump in with a question on training, so please go ahead.
There we go. That's the classic. That's a good start. I need a checklist before I start talking, but there you go. No, Jacob, you already mentioned training. From a training perspective, I mean, you looked at it as well. Are there specific things that stand out that need to be done by training? Are there things that you would think that there were stuck in a positive sense, but sometimes negative sense, with only limited suppliers of training? But would there be things that you would suggest, look, guys, let's put a standard in the training, or as an add-on for this program? Either way.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, as an operator, initially do some of the ground training yourself. Get everybody familiarized with your internal checklist, etc., and your procedures on how to decide whether to go with the RRLD on that day or basically just don't fly that day. So that is one thing. And then the other thing is, as I found out, to be honest, I thought it was better covered in the training, was we are using training facilities where we can only wet lease. And we had a lot of communication with these facilities, and they assured that no worries, we could easily incorporate it into our normal recurrent program. And we made the first compliance check of that, and they couldn't. So that is definitely something as an operator to assure that when you send the guys in the sim, that the instructors and the training facilities are up for it, or if you can do a dry lease, then make sure that your own instructors are up for it. The training in the sim is not hard in any way. It is basically just to demonstrate that you can actually land the aircraft in the area you're supposed to, and also use sufficient braking, etc., just like you do in a normal landing. But the calculations beforehand and making sure that you can actually be there. So it doesn't have to be landing into short runways per se. It could also be land and hold short before taxiway Charlie or whatever, and then you can actually re-elevate it, that you can do that, and then you have your training. And then the recurrent training after that is not that hard. It's fairly easy, and we as an operator decided to put some extra training on top of it to assure that we did some more training that the minimum requirement states in the EASA. But definitely it is something that the training providers need to be sure that they are also 100% familiar with this. And in the beginning they weren't, and I'm pretty sure, I'm going in the sim next week, I'm pretty sure they're picking up on it.
Okay, well, first of all, and we mentioned before, but we would like to thank both Per and the Danish CA and Blackbird and yourself for being the guinea pig for this. As you know, as an association, we are by members for members. So any feedback you already have, and I made a pitch at the beginning for the Flight Ops Committee, and I'll put in a link in the chat later on. Any information you have to make our life easier, and we as EBAA can help you push the training providers in making sure it is, because training we know is always a big thing, and the syllabus is almost a constant discussion between operators and the training providers. So if you can help us with that, that's much appreciated.
Definitely.
Johan?
Yeah. Thank you so much, and once again, thank you for taking part in this proof of concept. And I know you've provided the designer of the checklist and the whole initiative some valuable feedback during the way. With that, I think we can pass on to the Q&A session. There are some questions coming in as we go along, and I would like to have all the presenters available to answer some of the questions. I have one question from Tassilo, and Robert mentioned a little bit on this on LDTA in the beginning. With the implementation of LDTA, where is the benefit of RRLD operations? I see. What is the difference? And I know I have mixed this up earlier on this in the stage, what LDTA versus RRLD. Both came into force on the same date, etc. So where is the benefit, and who would like to answer that? Perhaps Rob or Giovanni? And Giovanni.
Yes, I can start, and then maybe if Rob wants to pitch in, of course, it's more than welcome. Well, first of all, just as another bit of a background, the two rules, LDTA and reduced required landing distance, are coming from different sources. The LDTA is an ICAO standard that it is across domains because it affects operations, aerodromes, and so on. So this was coming anyway, regardless of the 80% or not. Where is the advantage when using the LDTA? Well, first of all, the main advantage is on dry runways, because the LDTA makes no difference when you land on a dry runway. Even if you have a requirement to do the check at the time of arrival, the performance calculated at dispatch will remain the same. Then for the case of wet, well, here we can have a difference, but it's a difference that we cannot escape because the rule on LDTA will apply anyway. So if this results longer than the distance calculated with the 80% factor, well, there's little we can do about it. It has to be applied anyway.
Well, thank you. Yes, and Rob, you want to add something on the, let's say, the benefit of RRLD? No, yeah. Compared to
basically, it's simple. The in-flight check is applicable for every flight. It doesn't make any difference. What I think found out, and Giovanni, correct me if I'm wrong, there are benefits in dry runways, and that might not always be the case for wet runways for specific aircraft. Giovanni, is that correct?
Yes, it's fully correct.
So depending on the type of aircraft you fly, which are the data supplied by the manufacturer, you should be able to calculate whether for a specific aerodrome, the LDTA might not be, well, the reduced required landing distance operation might not provide you the benefit as you would like to wish to due to the LDTA limits. That's just the way it is.
Thank you. First of all, just as on a note, I see that someone has raised their hand. Please write your questions in the Q&A, and it's really getting filled, so please write it there rather than raise your hand, since this is in a webinar format. Your microphones are turned off by default.
Yeah, Johan, it was actually me that did it.
Ah,
I raised the hand. Yeah, I did. It was just, instead of having it as a theoretical thing, I would say specifically for the two types that we just send in the papers on the Gulfstream we are operating yesterday to the Danish CA for applying for the RRLD on that one as well. So it basically comes down to how the manufacturer have decided to calculate or test landing distance on wet runways. For instance, on the Falcon we operate when we're using RRLD and we for dispatch and also RRLD regarding wet runways. When we are airborne, we do the LDTA. It is, I wouldn't say 50-50, but it depends if it's going to be the LDTA that limits us or if it's going to be the RRLD. On the Gulfstream, they have put it in different wording regarding wet runway calculations for the LDTA. So they are actually adding a penalty on our thrust reversers, giving us a longer LDTA distance all the times we're operating into wet runways, regardless of the RRLD. So it really comes down to how the operator have tested and written the procedure in the AFM.
Okay, thank you. One question that has popped up on a number of ways is how can we get access to the checklist itself? And we will come back to, let's say, the operator part in the next couple of weeks on how exactly this will be done. For the regulator side, that is up to EASA to distribute and make it available to regulators from their side.
Just to add to that, Johan, what we really would like to know, if you go into the process, please let us know. Yeah. Because we want to know that which NAA will do this, and then we liaise with EASA to ensure that the NAA is also on the list, and we, hopefully EASA can then help with that NAA, and we can help you as an operator. It is a sometimes difficult process, so get us involved early, and we are there to help. We're trying to make it more and more sophisticated as we go along, and hopefully have something like an online checklist at some point. But for the shortest, let us know and let us be part of your discussion with the NAA.
Okay,
If I can complement a bit on this, I was discussing in the past few days with John Franklin before this webinar, and we were thinking to disseminate the checklist to NAAs through our network of advisory bodies. So we will see how to organize this in the coming days, and we will keep you informed of any action we take.
Thank you for that. One other rather specific question on the RRLD requirements. There's a number of approaches that cannot be, where if you have to use them, will not be available for RRLD. One of them is steep approaches. And what is in this context a steep approach?
I'm not sure to understand the question exactly.
What type of steep approach, let's say how many degrees of an approach would make RRLD not possible to use? Is it a steep approach that requires permission, special approval to use, or a certain degree?
Yes, in fact, there is a specific rule on steep approaches, which is Cat-A 245, and for those approaches, a specific prior approval is required that goes into the OPS spec. So the meaning of the rule is that you cannot, cumulate the use of the 80% landing factor with a steep approach. And the reason for this is because you cannot accumulate the risks of both operations, because these are both ways these are all ways to achieve a reduced landing distance or to make possible landing at difficult airports. Of course, each of these operations has a risk, and this is the reason why a prior approval is required and a number of conditions have to be fulfilled. For example, also for the steep approaches, you need an AFM statement that the aircraft is capable to fly at that angle. And yes, this is why, because we cannot assess what is the accumulation of the different risks of different type of special operations.
Yeah. So it's when you have an approval to do a specific special operations with steep approach, you cannot mix that on top with RRLD. Okay, thank you. Another question from one of the audience. How is it intended that the NAAs will issue approvals? Will it be general operations approval, or will it be operations specific for a specific aircraft type?
Well, the approval, given that there is an AFM eligibility, the approval is specific for the type. Yes.
Yeah, that's the same conclusion that we ended up with, that it needs to be written on the operation specification according to 965 Form 139 requirements, and of course it needs to be aircraft specific due to this requirement of the AFM statement. However, the starting point for us was that we would, if possible, avoid making these approvals runway airport/runway specific, as you do, for example, in these steep approach approvals. So there's an element of a general thing that you need to write in your operations manual, but it's also aircraft type specific at some points. So what we've done is that it's made us a statement on the lower part of the ops spec under other section where we have written the RRLD approved on that specific aircraft type. So when you, Jacob, applied for the other aircraft types that you're operating, well, we need to go through that process to see the airplane flight matter statement and so on. But many of the other steps are already performed, your runway analysis and all that. So when applying for another airplane, I would say that the process will be a lot less time consuming than the first time approval for the same operator.
Thank you. So, to summarize a bit, the operator will have, especially when it comes to Class A, performance Class A aircraft, a general approval for the operation where you take training and all the other factors into account. And then since there is a need for an AFM statement, there will also be a link to the aircraft type. But the basis is the operations will have the approval. So,
yeah, may I add another thing, please?
Sure.
Sorry. There could also be a minor issue regarding the training, because it also depends on the quality of the simulator on the on that specific type, whether it is able to produce any data on how much actually was the landing distance on this approach and so on. Not all simulators are equipped. I know that for most business jet operators, that's not a problem, but we need to look at it in a bigger picture, so that could be an issue that could be different from aircraft to aircraft, although it's the same operator, but not from aircraft type to aircraft type, although it's still with the same operator. So that's an area that also need that we need to have in mind.
Okay.
I think with that you almost answered the last question we had left open, which was by Gregor Gabor. Airplane eligibility is actually the main limiting factor. So I think we all agree on that one. Okay, I think with that, we have answered all the questions we've seen there. Johan, is there any other questions or?
I have not seen any questions, and I think there was a question in the chat that has been answered as well. So with that, I'd like to conclude the webinar. And thank you very much for your interest. And the next steps ahead, we can switch to this. Yeah. Additional questions, I'm sure that if you engage on this route to try and get approval for RRLD, there will be questions popping up. Don't hesitate to contact us. You have an email here, safety@ebaa.org, or any of your normal contacts at the EBAA Secretariat. And as mentioned, we had some question on how the checklist will be made available to operators. We are dealing with this as we speak. So in the next couple of weeks, there will be some information transmitted on this. Also through the Ops working group that Robert mentioned. And with that, I would like to thank you all for participating, listening in to this webinar. Our speakers that has been diligently working, some of them for a decade, to achieve this opportunity for the business aviation sector. And I wish you a pleasant day. Thank you so much.